Welcome back to the SDG Warriors Podcast. I'm Simar Mohanty, the team lead and student coordinator at SDG Warriors. We're a team of passionate student change makers and STEMness on a mission to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, leveraging the power of STEM education and 21st century skills. Brought to you by us SDG Warriors. This podcast features inspiring stories from edu heroes and STEM experts from around the world, ideal for students, teachers, parents, and pretty much anybody interested in STEM, education, and social impact. This podcast aims to provide enriching learning experiences and drive positive change in local, global, and digital communities. Well, grab your backpack and map because today we're exploring the treetops with the real life Dora the Explorer, Dr. Margaret Lowman. Called the real life Lorax by National Geographic and referred to as one of the Einsteins of the treetops. In the Wall Street Journal article, Canopy Meg is an author, explorer, scientist, Arbornaut, Fulbright scholar, and a change agent for conservation. She has devoted over 4 decades of exploration for treetop secrets as one of the world's first pioneers to design the Canopy toolkit and published 10 books and over 200 peer-reviewed publications. Her latest book, The Arbornaut, is a dynamic memoir of a girl tree climber. She works tirelessly against the clock to save the world's 10 most endangered forests using canopy walkways for ecotourism. And I couldn't be more excited and honored to have you on our podcast today, Dr. Margaret.
Oh, thank you. Such a pleasure to be here. And I really am honored because I love what you guys are doing. It's very exciting.
Well, the honor is all ours. Before we jump into our conversation, to help our listeners audibly visualize the entire experience, can you tell us, Dr. Margaret, where are you right now? What is the weather like outside? And what can you see from your window?
Oh, I'd love to. So I am in Florida. That's my base camp. Florida has good access to the Amazon or Africa or even the forests of North America and all the way across to Asia. So this is where I live. Today it's hot and humid. It will be about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The birds are singing because they're heading south for almost migration time in this part of the world. The last of the flowers are coming out. The trees are almost starting to wrap up their season. So we're coming into late autumn for Florida, and it's also hurricane season here. So luckily it's a beautiful sunny day, so we don't have to worry about hopefully losing our power on this broadcast.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Back here in Bangalore, India, after a brief glimpse of sunshine, the city has returned to its signature chilly, rainy days. The trees are at their lush green peak, and as I gaze outside my window, I can see a metro train which is resting at the station, and it is framed perfectly against the backdrop of the 6:30 p.m. evening sky.
Oh, I actually look at a pond and maybe an alligator will peek out in a minute. And then I'll go, oh, goody. I forgot to tell you my window view.
Absolutely fine. Well, now that we've got all that visualized, let's start right at the beginning and take a stroll through memory lane. Dr. Margaret, can you tell us what did your childhood and school days look like, and how did it impact the work you do as an Arbornaut today?
I actually started my career at about age 3, I must confess. I was a very shy child and I loved to play outdoors. I didn't do all the indoor things like makeup or sleepovers with the other girls, but I got up early and went bird watching and I loved nature, and I grew up in a very small town, so there wasn't a whole lot else to do. There wasn't shopping or going to movies or anything that I could do. So I ended up being friends with the trees, and I knew and learned a lot about all the local flowers and trees and birds when I was young. So in some ways, I guess I started my career at about age 3, building little tree forts and playing in the local trees with a couple of my friends.
That sounds wonderful, being friends with trees. It reminds me of my own school days when we used to go on nature walks around the campus. We'd collect like different types of leaves and assignments, and we press them against our newspapers to study their venation patterns. I mean, those were quite fun times. Well,
That's
these
right. Yes, I collected too. Same thing. Put them in magazines and newspapers and come back and look later.
So we have a similar experience. Well, those early experiences, like yours, really do plant the seeds of curiosity and wonder about the natural world. And speaking of journeys, we were curious to know what was your initial vision for exploring the forest canopies, and how has it evolved over the years?
So I guess as a small town child, I never really thought about going anywhere. I'd never heard of tropical rainforests except to who would travel far away because I thought that was only for jet plane pilots or airline stewardesses. So lo and behold, I studied trees, but it did lead me to getting a few scholarships along the way. I was always hopeful of finding some funds for my studies, and I did end up getting some funding to go to Australia for graduate school. And I thought, yay, I could see the tropical rainforests of Australia, which I did. And it was amazing because when I got to the University of Sydney, I was the only student and the first student to ever study the rainforests in Australia. So I got pretty scared, but my advisor said, well, it's up to you. You just have to figure out a way to do that. And that's what led me to trying to study the whole tree, because the tops of tropical trees were so high in the air compared to my hometown when I was little. Growing up in the temperate forests, the trees were much shorter. So my vision expanded over the years. It was not something strategic, and I didn't have a lot of sophisticated mentors when I was young. So it really did evolve, to use your word, slowly as I got my confidence and learned to talk a little bit in class and not be so shy. And as you said, really become a voice for the trees, because after all, they can't talk.
Absolutely. At this point of time, we need voices for the trees. Like you mentioned, they cannot talk, and we need all hands on deck when we talk about developing methods for conservation of canopy biodiversity, and focus on areas which are at risk of deforestation, which would ultimately cascade to the fauna on the treetops. And speaking about understanding canopy biodiversity, Dr. Margaret, during your early research, you made several groundbreaking discoveries about the insect plant interactions in the canopy. So, what was the one discovery that surprised you the most, and how did it change your understanding of the forest ecosystems?
I guess my most amazing discovery has to be the fact that by going into the treetops, suddenly I was surrounded by what appears to be about 50% of the biodiversity on the planet. I studied a lot of insects. I have some little plastic ones here for my grandchildren, but I found in the canopy that there were millions of insects. So this was extraordinary to be part of the early pioneering team that figured out that half of the world's biodiversity lived in the canopy. And not only that, but a lot of them were insects. And I also found out, because I patiently measured leaves and counted leaves and studied bugs on leaves, and lo and behold, it appears that something like 20% of most leaves get eaten by insects. So there's a whole lot of what I call the salad bar in the sky. There's a lot of activity going on with insects eating leaves, much more than we ever realized from the ground level, because we can't see most of the leaves of a tree when we're standing on the ground.
Absolutely. Insects do play a big role in maintaining our ecosystems. And I remember learning about these ecological pyramids in school last year, where the tree ecosystem formed the spindle shaped pyramid. So the big tree, which acts as a producer, supports a large number of insects, which are the primary herbivore consumers, which are in turn fed to a smaller number of birds. And I imagine that uncovering these hidden interactions between these insects and plants must have revealed just how intricate and interdependent the life in the canopy truly is. Well,
Absolutely.
yes, so Dr. Margaret, your research has not only deepened our understanding but also pushed the boundaries of how we study these ecosystems. So, speaking of which, while you were working on your PhD, you developed some of the first methods for studying the forest canopy. So, what were some of the most creative or unusual techniques that you used to access the treetops, and from where did you begin your research?
So when I first realized that I needed to see the top of these really tall tropical trees, I asked my advisor if I could train a monkey. I thought it would be great to have a monkey climb up the tree and collect for me, and I could just stand on the ground, because I wasn't very athletic. I didn't do a sport in high school in my generation, and so I didn't think about climbing the trees. But my advisor kindly said, "No, Meg, you will have to climb the tree yourself and figure out a way to do that." And so I actually welded a slingshot out of a piece of metal, a Y-shaped piece of metal, and I got a fish line and some rubber from an old tire from an old car, and I made this slingshot, and lo and behold, I put the fish line over a branch of the tree, and then I used it to run a cord over that was strong enough to pull a climbing rope. And I got this idea from the caving club at Sydney University, who had ropes to go down into caves, but nobody had ever used the ropes to go up. And of course, tree trimmers use their own level of different equipment, but they're always using it to really cut the trees back or chip away at the branches. And I had to make sure my methods were very gentle on the tree and didn't do any damage. So I sewed my own harness, I made my own slingshot, and I borrowed a few of the pieces of gear from the caving club. So that's how I got started. I literally made the methods up myself. Unknown to me, one other guy in Costa Rica did the same thing at the same time, but we didn't have internet in 1978 when I first started doing this. And so we never even knew about each other till 5 years later. But this guy named Don Perry and I technically are the mother and father of canopy research, because we designed these methods to get into the treetops all by ourselves. And I will say it was pretty scary, but it was really exciting to get into that treetop for my first time ever.
That's definitely innovation at its finest, which is the beautiful intersection of engineering, botany, and conservation. I mean, innovating in the field must have required a lot of creativity, especially when there were no established methods to follow, and you started everything. Listening to how you utilized the slingshot, taking inspiration from the caving club, and later developing the canopy walkways. I mean, that's such an inspiration, Dr. Margaret.
Oh,
And
thank you. Yeah, I should mention the canopy walkways, because you know what? I wanted to take students up with me, and you can never take more than one person on one rope. So that's where I ended up designing the world's first canopy walkway with a colleague in Queensland, Australia, because we wanted to share with more people. And so that's where the walkways came from. And that is my favorite method, because it's safer and easier for even a student in a wheelchair can go on a canopy walkway, or a lady in a walker like my mom was for so many years, quite handicapped. So it was great to have the walkways as another invention.
Absolutely. One of your biggest superpowers is making these inaccessible places more accessible to others. And this brings me to my next question. Dr. Margaret, can you tell us what was the inspiration behind Canopy Walkways and how did you overcome the engineering and ecological challenges in the development?
Oh, great question. So I was bringing volunteers into the rainforest and I was teaching them to climb, students and sometimes people that just wanted to help the planet in some way by volunteering with my research. And so I taught hundreds of people to climb. And when we would all stay in a national park or an ecotourist lodge, the owner got a little nervous. He said, I'm a little worried. What if somebody falls? And that's the person that together he and I designed this idea. What if we could put a trail through the treetops that people could walk on? And so the first walkway was built in Lamington National Park in Australia because I had so many volunteers and people training to climb on the ropes. So that walkway was so successful. It truly changed Australians' culture because they really were people at the time that wanted to cut the forest down. Many Australians thought the rainforest was full of snakes and poisonous things and wasn't a nice place. And they were very happy if it got cut down. But when they saw the canopy through the walkway, they all realized what a precious, special treasure trove it was. And it really started the whole movement of conservation in Australia. The engineering is very simple. It's really two choices, which are either poles to put bridges on and platforms, or actually affixing to the whole tree itself, which can be done safely with people who understand how trees work and engineers who understand the angles. So it's not much different from a tree house or a simple little structure that's very easy to maintain. So the good news is that canopy walkways are very nice to the forest. They don't hurt anything, and they're very wonderful for making discoveries and teaching people about the importance of trees.
Absolutely. The idea of canopy walkways is so brilliant, not just as a research tool, but as a way to bring the people closer to nature without disturbing the delicate balance of these ecosystems. Like you mentioned, Dr. Margaret, overcoming the engineering and ecological challenges required simplicity and a lot of innovative thinking, such as using the local materials and keeping things simple to create a a very simple but yet an engineering marvel. And that brings me to my next question, that you started by creating a single canopy walkways and now you're on a mission to do that around the world. So can you tell us more about the folklore around Mission Green?
Sure. So I have a friend who's a marine biologist named Sylvia Earle, and she started a project called Mission Blue about 10 years ago, where she wanted to bring attention to endangered areas of the oceans and coastlines. So I said, Sylvia, I think I need to do this on land. And I asked her if it would be okay if I started a similar project called Mission Green, which would identify the hotspots on the land part of the planet, and especially to pick out those forests which are most endangered. And believe it or not, in Madagascar, there's only 3% of their forests left. In northern Ethiopia, there's only 5% left. So we have a lot of countries that are losing not just the trees, but of course, all the birds and insects and animals that live in the trees. So it's a really tragic thing. And so Mission Green uses my canopy toolkit. The idea is to build walkways. I fundraise to build these walkways and donate them to local communities where women and families can earn a living by becoming ecotourism guides or chefs or boat drivers or ecotourist lodge owners. And in turn, they can expose and share their forests with visitors who come in and really love to go up into the treetops and see the view and see all the cool animals. And even better, local students can use the canopy walkway to become future scientists or arbonauts like me and make discoveries about things living up there. So I call it 10 by 10 by 10 by 10, saving 10 forests in 10 countries. It will cost about $10 million. And in turn, it will hopefully hire 10 to the second power women and families, and give 10 to the third power of students, maybe 1,000 students, the chance to make discoveries and become scientists. So we're about halfway done. We've built these walkways in the Amazon, in Malaysia. We're fundraising for one in Madagascar. We can't wait to come to India in probably 2026 and build you a walkway over there, and a few other countries. You can look on my website, www.treefoundation.org, and find Mission Green is the biggest project of my Tree Foundation mission. So I'm excited to come to India, and don't worry, I'm going to call on you, Samir. You'll be my best helper.
That sounds awesome, and I cannot wait for the Canopy Walkway to open in India. These hope spots for forests and the Canopy toolbox that you employ to empower local for global. Mission Green sounds like a project born out of deep respect for these ecosystems and a desire to protect them for the future generations while allowing the people to experience their beauty firsthand, something that lies at the core of sustainability. And this protective instinct likely played a role in one of your major innovations. So, Dr. Margaret, how do you balance the need for human access to the canopy with the imperative to protect these fragile ecosystems? And also, we'd love to know that what can students like us do to fulfill our experiences and truly immerse ourselves to maximize our learning?
Great questions. Well, first of all, I feel that we're at a crossroads. We can choose between logging a forest, which is what most humans want to do, or developing ecotourism in the forest, which has a little tiny bit of impact, but of course it has much less impact than clear cutting the entire forest. So I'm a real proponent of ecotourism because it gets people into the trees to appreciate them, and they go home and really want to save them. So that little tiny bit of human invasion is well worth it. And believe it or not, it's much better for the trees if we go in the canopy walkway than actually make a trail on the forest floor, because when we walk on the forest floor, we compact the roots and we create barriers that some animals won't cross. Some tiny animals get very scared about the compacted soil and the human trampling. So in some ways, building a walkway is probably the best human impact that we can have on a forest. And it's very, very minimal compared to the clear cutting. So what can we humans do is a really, really important question. First of all, we need to save big trees. It's very tempting to let people cut the big trees down, and then they come back and say, plant trees. Everybody plant a tree, and we'll make up for all the big trees being cut down. But when you think about a sloth living in a treetop, or you think about those millions of insects up in the tops of your beautiful Vedipala trees in India and fig trees, you and I know that they can't live in a little tiny seedling that's maybe this big. They need a big condominium in the sky, which is what a mature tree really is, so that there's room for all those millions of insects. And if we lose those big trees, we basically have extinction of many organisms, because the insects have nowhere to go and the pollinators of the orchids have nowhere to go. So first of all, we need to work together to save the big trees. Those forests provide us with medicines and oxygen and climate control and shade and timber and fantastic soil conservation, and amazing food like chocolate comes from a tree. So we really need to protect our trees. And secondly, it's still important to plant trees when we can and where we can, because when you plant a tree, you do have to maintain it for many years. You have to water it and protect it from things eating it. So it is a big responsibility to plant a tree. It's not just a day-long activity. So two things we can do: mostly protect big trees, but secondly, definitely replace trees that have been cut down with seedlings and saplings and look after them so they can grow big again.
Absolutely. Balancing human access with conservation is a big issue, especially in today's world where ecotourism is on the rise. And listening to the tale of Canopy Walkways, along with how we can get the most out of this experience and advocate for positive change, inspires me to think that students can play an active role in this balance, both as learners and as stewards for the environment, for advocating for big trees and also asking more questions and observing the environment around you when you're going for nature walks and when you're going for nature walks, the best thing that you can do is to fully immerse yourself in the experience and understand the interconnectedness between the life which is present on the canopy and the tree itself, because at the end of the day, when you cut a tree, you're not only destroying that tree, you're destroying a home. Where would the animals go? Like you mentioned, Dr. Margaret, a sloth or a monkey, they cannot live on a seedling. So definitely going on afforestation drives and advocating for policy change and using the power of student voice is a big takeaway for our audience today. Well, Dr. Margaret, educational programs play a big role in instilling a conservation ethic in the canopy, and with its unique flora and fauna, it offers so much to discover. Speaking of that, canopy research has uncovered a lot of unique flora and fauna which are not found on the forest floor. So, can you share some of the most mysterious species or ecological interactions that you've discovered in the canopy?
Sure, I'd love to, but how many hours do we have to talk? There are so many. It's all exciting. And I'm a lover of birds, but I decided to study trees because birds live in trees. Just as you said, it's their home. So I'm just always amazed to find incredible macaws nesting in tree holes and fantastic birds making beautiful woven nests in the tops of the trees. But it leads me, of course, back to the insects, because the insects are the food for many birds, and the insects themselves do eat the leaves, as I mentioned. So we continue to have these amazing pieces of an incredible quilt where we have to put together all of the components, and it really comes right down to little tiny things as well. One of my heroes and friends in the world of science was a famous biologist named E.O. Wilson, who's passed away, but he always said that the insects were the glue of the ecosystem because they're not necessarily seen, but they hold it all together. And so I would love to just mention one of my favorite microorganisms that I use a lot with education for children, and it's called the water bear or the tardigrade. It specifically is its own phylum called Tardigrada. You do need a little microscope to see them, but not a big one. And they are amazing because they love to live in a drop of water, and they're an incredibly resilient organism. They can live in hot water. They can live in the ice of Antarctica. They've gone to the moon. And in fact, I think in India, that satellite venture took some tardigrades, and evidently they got loose or they broke out or something. We think maybe the Indian tardigrades are living on the moon now, but there's a lot of great stories about their resilience and their incredible extremophile characteristics. And I use them when I study with maybe students that have less opportunity. I had a 5-year program with kids in wheelchairs, helping them become field biologists because no one ever tried to help them. And one of the things we did was study water bears. They collected water bears from the forest canopy. Why? Well, because most of the species were new. So those students got to publish their results, discover a new species, and really get the joy of being a field biologist, even though they were limited to a wheelchair. So I think there's space and room for everybody to become a new explorer in the canopy. If you want to study little things or big things, there's plenty of activity up in the treetops.
Absolutely. And that sounds so fascinating, Dr. Margaret. The canopy truly is a world of its own, harboring species that we might have thought would have never existed. And like you mentioned, tardigrades and the extremophiles, we actually had an hour-long episode with Dr. Rosa Espinoza on this topic of extremophiles. So to our listeners, if you want to dive deep into that topic, do check out that episode. Well,
Great.
Dr. Margaret, now let's explore the broader applications of canopy research in an area which is very relevant to many of us who live in metropolitan cities. What are some of the best practices for conserving and expanding urban forest canopies to maximize ecological benefits, and what roles can students play?
Right. That's a really important, and it's challenging because in a lot of urban areas, the trees have been cut down. So students who live in really big urban areas need to read books. First of all, you can always learn about trees if you can't see them. But if you are lucky enough to have some urban trees, do make sure they're cared for. They need water. A lot of times the cement gets very close to their trunks and they don't have the opportunity to take in water. Most trees have a root system that's the same size as their canopies. So you want to encourage your cities to give them a little space to get rainfall and get water into their root systems, which is really good, and not to trim them too much. There's a tendency to want to prune and make the canopies really tiny. But the more you can encourage healthy trees in urban areas, the more wildlife you have, and also to select for native trees. If you can encourage your governments to plant the trees that are native to India and don't bring some of those eucalyptus trees from Australia, where I come from, or some of the pine trees from North America, it's really important for all the wildlife and to have their native trees because that's what they need for their homes. So those are the types of things you can do, and always encouraging places that might be developing in your urban areas to create green space and keep parks and have schools get access to a little bit of green space. It's not only healthy, but it can be part of a biology class too. So it's really great for the teachers and the students to have that. And if you send me your address, by the way, I'd love to send you a couple books because you live in Bangalore. It's a big city, and I did write a lot of books about trees. Maybe I think I've written 95% of the canopy books in the world. So I'd love to send you a couple copies so that you can keep up your learning about trees when you don't have a real tree to look at.
Well, lifelong learning at its finest. We'd love to read your books, Dr. Margaret. And listening to your thoughts, I think it's quite interesting to see how these urban environments, which are often viewed as concrete jungles, can actually benefit from the principles of canopy research. And like you shared, expanding urban forest canopies is essential for not only maintaining the ecological balance, but also for the general health and well being of the city dwellers. And we, as students, can act as environmental stewards and advocate for green policies in our communities. Whenever you see a tree, go ahead and water it and understand that these trees require care. Even if you're starting small with your school itself, like we SDG Warriors did, students can play a direct role in reimagining these urban spaces and shaping the green cities of the future. But beyond just thinking about canopies, we were curious to know, Dr. Margaret, over the years, what are some of the most exciting technological advancements that you've seen in canopy research? And given the rapid advancement of AI, what future technologies do you think will further enhance our understanding of forest canopies?
So there's been some amazing developments. Of course, drones were fantastic for me about 15 years ago because we could map canopies. But you always had to combine these satellite images or drone images with real climbing because you never could see the exact insect eating the tree or the exact pollinator of the orchid up in the top of the tree. So we always need people to go close to the details to check out what we can find with aerial satellite images or drone images, which is great. And AI is just coming into forest research. I think it's going to have an amazing opportunity for the big picture. Things like mapping and predicting forest fires will be fantastic. Probably ways to model forest growth will be fantastic, but we still will need that interpersonal, up close Arbornaut tree climber person that can find the details of the water bears or understand how the fog gets into the foliage of the redwood tree. So just know that we still will need live humans combined with the amazing technologies of some of these new developments. So don't give up hope. You still have to train as a scientist, but we still can advance our science with some of these amazing new technologies.
Absolutely. Technology is rapidly changing the way we study and interact with the natural world. And the one thing that we need to remember is that the human touch will never go out of touch. Some of the developments that I'm most excited about include the remote sensing technologies, drones, and the AI powered data analysis, like you shared, Dr. Margaret, which can help us to understand, monitor, and protect these forests. And we actually discussed that with Miss Astrid Sue in one of our previous episodes. So that's quite
Great.
interesting, a correlation. Well,
Yeah.
moving on to the next question. As STEMness, we were so curious to know what advice do you have for young women who aspire to balance a demanding career with the personal responsibilities while tackling biases in STEM environments?
I love that question. And just know there still is a bias and it still is a challenge, even though you think it's better. And yes, it's better. But my advice to you, young women, would be bolder and stronger than I was. I was too shy. I never thought women could be scientists because men told me that when I was young. In my generation, it wasn't a given that a girl could be a scientist. So I want to encourage you to be bold and strong. And secondly, I encourage you to help other women. I think women have to be supportive of other women. I have observed some women a little negative in the workplace to other women, thinking they haven't suffered enough or something like that. But I think I watch men in the man's world. They support each other. They always have. In North America, men go play golf on the weekend, or they go out for dinner after work together while the women go home and help with the homework and do the dishes and make the dinner for the children. So I think that women have to really support other women and be a team together and go out of your way to mentor the next group of women coming into your workplace or the younger students in your school and give them the confidence that you might be gaining. And with that, I have a lot of hope that women helping women and women being bold and strong will make the world a better place. We need women in conservation. There are still 90% men on boards of directors running conservation committees and organizations in emerging countries in particular, where they really, really need conservation. So we need to get women at the decision-making table.
Wow, Dr. Margaret, listening to how beautifully you articulated that piece of advice, that truly warms my heart. And I think your story is a powerful reminder for our listeners, especially our girls, that breaking barriers and succeeding, even in the face of adversity, is within our reach. It's all about resilience, believing in ourselves, and not letting the imposter syndrome hold us back during those toughest moments. Because after all, the light of our passion, and when we advocate for each other, when a woman supports a woman, all that can guide us in our most chaotic moments. And hearing this from someone who has accomplished so much while also overcoming challenges in a field which was historically dominated by men, it's incredibly inspiring, and it gives me, and I'm sure many other women, the confidence to keep pushing forward. So thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Margaret.
You're so welcome.
Well, moving on to our next question. From all your adventures so far as an Arbornaut, what have been your biggest learnings?
Gosh, I guess one thing is I've learned a lot from children. My motto is no child left indoors. I really value getting children into nature, mostly because my two boys came with me on a lot of my field trips. They learned to climb trees when they were 5 and 6 years old because I was a single mom. And so I think I learned that you need to get your sense of wonder from young people, that scientists oftentimes lose the sense of wonder of the natural world or what their discoveries are all about. So never give up hope, and always work with children that will help you retain that sense of wonder. And secondly, I learned that you need to just doggedly say yes to everything. Volunteer when you're young, offer to help another fellow scientist that might need somebody to help count lizards in the middle of the night, or go and find alligator eyeballs in the swamp, or whatever it takes. It's just a good thing to participate and gain more experiences. And those have been, for me, really important learnings. And then to give it back. Obviously, I'm at an age now where programs like Mission Green are more important to me than publishing another paper, which paper publications are really good for your resume, but they don't actually save the trees. So we need to think of practical ways that really help save trees. When you get to my old age, my dear, then you need to think of ways that you give back to the planet. And that's really what my focus is now.
Well, those are some incredible insights and takeaways for our audience today, Dr. Margaret. A journey of continuous learning, not just about the natural world, but about life itself. Maintaining curiosity and exploring new things are essential qualities, not just in scientific endeavors, but also in facing challenges and pursuing personal growth. Well, Dr. Margaret, it's been a wonderful conversation so far, and it's been absolutely inspiring listening to your journey and insights. Thank you so much for your time. And as we come to the end of this episode, let's wrap up all the learnings and takeaways in our last segment, the Inspire segment. Well, Dr. Margaret, who or what has been your biggest inspiration in life and why?
Ooh, you know what? I never had any role models. I never had any living scientists near me or in my town. So I really admired Rachel Carson. She was a lady who was deceased when I was a child, but she actually discovered that DDT and other chemicals killed wildlife. So I really admired her courage to talk about that. And I also loved, there were people who were, naturalists at a young age. And I used to admire reading about different kinds of naturalists who would go in the forest and do things. But again, I would read the biographies from the public library. And so that was as close as I ever got to having real role models. My best inspiration are the trees. And I think a tree nurtures the community, houses the community, welcomes everything into it, provides food and water for so many. So I feel that in some way, the tree is my biggest inspiration. And I will say my two boys were my great inspiration. A lot of what I do as a conservation biologist is think about the next generation. And by having my own two children that were part of the next generation, it gave me a real close sense of wanting to leave the world a better place for them. And I don't think it's a stock portfolio or owning a piece of artwork, but I think it's hopefully giving them a healthy planet. That's my biggest inspiration for keeping me going and ensuring that I don't give up on this world of ours at this point.
That's truly heartwarming, Dr. Margaret. Inspirational words generally have the power to change lives. And what you shared, Dr. Margaret, could be the encouragement that someone needs to take inspiration from trees and for your family members itself. Well, Dr. Margaret, what words of inspiration were given to you that you would like to pass along to others?
Oh, I would say enjoy nature. I put that on my emails whenever I sign off. If you go back and look on my emails, that's my kind of mantra. I just think it's so important for people not to lose touch with nature, even if it's bacteria in your refrigerator, even if it's little weeds in the sidewalk, even if it's some bug coming to the light at night out in the streetlights. I think we have to keep track of Mother Nature, and she inspires us and continues to inspire us. So don't lose track of that. And take a child outdoors. Even if you don't have your own child, you can borrow one, or you can maybe take a friend and appreciate nature with another human being. It's also good. I love to appreciate nature alone as well as with others. So that would be my word of advice and inspiration.
Absolutely. Appreciating Mother Nature and exploring the biodiversity in your backyards. Lastly, Dr. Margaret, could you give us a call to action? What can we children and young people do to make the world a better place?
Absolutely. First of all, you need to read about it. So that's why I want to send you my books. I write for children and I write for adults because we can't save nature if we don't know about it. And I really understand that a lot of people need the knowledge, and it needs to be written clearly and with fun. So I've been very dedicated to writing books for different ages for that reason. Secondly, after you've done your homework of reading, then you need to try your best to save big trees in your neighborhood, to save nature, to look around at those green spaces if they exist, and work really hard to appreciate them and bring them to other people's attention. And I will say that for my country of North America, we need to pay more attention to how we shop. We need to be really careful that we're not buying products that come from clearing rainforests. And it's sometimes difficult to see a label that says, this orange came from clearing a rainforest, or this palm oil in my shampoo came from clearing the forests of Southeast Asia. But we need to delve down and make sure that we are buying products or recycling products so that we don't use as many products that cause the clearing of our precious forests, which they do. So that's another difficult but challenging activity, to watch how you shop, to save the green places, and of course, to try to save those big trees. And last but not least, share it with your Sunday school, with your school teachers, with your families, with your anyone you can. When you learn about trees and nature, try to share it with others so that they too can become good stewards, and maybe join your wonderful term, your SDG Warriors. They can be of all ages, can't they? People who are interested in making sure that the planet is sustainable for my children and my grandchildren, and you someday might have children and grandchildren, and you want to pass on Mother Nature to the next generation.
Well, that's a powerful way to end our discussion today, leaving with listeners with a sense of purpose to be responsible consumers, to know that to educate, you yourself need to be educated, and to be environmental stewards. It gives us a clear idea about how we can contribute to a better world and be the change. Dr. Margaret, I couldn't thank you enough for taking out time and joining us on today's episode, and taking on this extraordinary journey through forest canopies. From your early years as a curious child to becoming a trailblazing Arbornaut, it's been amazing to hear how those childhood experiences evolved into groundbreaking research, from the innovative canopy walkways to your awe-inspiring discoveries of insect-plant interactions, to all the creative methods that you use to reach these treetops, especially the ones that you mentioned earlier. Dr. Margaret, your passion, dedication, and innovation are truly inspiring, and we are grateful for the opportunity to learn from your experiences as a woman in STEM. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. And I can't wait for you to, in 10 more years, you'll be my colleague and take over all of my work. So I'm looking forward to that day. All the best. Bye, everybody.
Bye. To all our listeners, we hope that this conversation has sparked your curiosity and inspired to reach for the treetops and protect the world around you. To learn more about Dr. Margaret's amazing work, you can head over to canopymeg.com, along with following the adventures of the Tree Foundation and Mission Green, the links to which are included in the show notes below. To deepen your knowledge of everything STEM, sustainability, and education, subscribe to the SDG Warriors podcast for in-depth discussions and meaningful conversations with leading experts like Dr. Margaret, who are shaping a better world one action at a time. If you love this episode, help others find it by leaving a review and sharing it with your friends, teachers, and family. Remember to stay curious, climb a tree, and be the change. Until next time, it's bye from the SDG Warriors.